What are we trying to tackle? One of the largest problems of society, retirement. How are we going to pay for, how is a shrinking youth going to pay for people retiring? And if that's not going to happen, how are people going to retire? If pension plans are not going to be able to take care of that, how are people going to own the problem and solve for this? I think in most societies, in Singapore, in the US, or in China and Southeast Asia, people think, okay, it's up to them to make it happen. And happening more and more in Europe, people are realizing, well, if I don't save enough money, maybe the government is not able to support me. Okay. Then when we look into this, what are we trying to do? We're trying to make as much money as possible. What do we want to use our money with the maximum security and an environment that can protect us, with the most certainty that we have. Forecasts are impossible, but what you're trying to do is diversify your risk in a certain way that is going to deliver, and especially generate yield. This is absolutely critical, because if we count on selling off a property, on selling off our stock to live, or having cash, that has a lot of risk. Because something might happen, the price of the housing might go down, and suddenly you're not rich anymore. While if you have yield, if you have the yield from an asset, that will fluctuate much less and will give you that security that you still have the asset. It's a little bit like dividends. The only thing is that dividends generally are not the best, don't give you the best outcome. While this can happen, we're trying to find a way down to show this. What would we do this? This is a very clear example. Singapore versus Spain. Just looking at the example. Singapore, incredibly rich country. I think latest GDP is around 90,000 or 80,000 US dollars. Spain, close to 40,000. Very different. Both wealthy countries in many ways, because Spanish people earn less, but they have an incredible amount of subsidies that actually increase their quality of life, while they don't have the risks of life in other parts. But it doesn't matter. What we're trying to focus here is with 2 million Singapore dollars. What can you do in in Singapore? You can buy a property, basically one apartment. That's basically what the prices are now. Plus, if you're a foreigner or is your second home, you're going to have to pay 60% tax. Big difference with Spain in most countries is that the tax will only be around 10%. There'll still be a bunch of small costs, and you need to account for them. But let's say it will be around 10%. With those 2 million, you could actually probably in Barcelona buy 3 apartments of equivalent size to what you would get in Singapore, depending on the luxury. I mean, you could get a really nice, really luxurious apartment in the center of Barcelona, but that's not what you want, because that won't generate yield. That will be one asset, and that won't create the key point about the certainty. Why is the beauty of owning a lot of different smaller properties? That will give you much more certainty, because if one doesn't work, the other will work. You're diversifying. It's like having stock of one company or having stock of 8 companies. That's exactly why index funds beat investment managers year after year. Then when we're looking at this, with that property, you probably can generate 7K a month of Singapore dollars. Perfect. What would you generate in Spain? Much less, obviously. Much less. However, multiplied by 8 properties. And here we're looking in the higher range, okay? Because we're looking at renting out, focusing very much on commercial properties. Commercial meaning they're being rented out to tourists, and they can be rent out to individuals, but generally much more focused on the tourist market. Spain is a massive tourist destination. It's not in the slides, but the data is the country with the highest, well, most of Europe is, but very concentrated in terms, especially the south of Europe. But Spain is the country with highest amount of tourists per inhabitant. Okay, then very important here, the risk is allocated in Singapore for those $2 million. If you have $20 million, that might not be your problem. You can buy a bunch of properties in Singapore. But if you have 2 million, 4 million, 5 million, the diversification of that investment in Spain will give you much more. Then the important part, eventually, what you want is yield. What you want is every year to get the additional money. And when you're looking at this, okay, oops, apologies. When you're looking at this, you will end up on a yield post-tax, okay? Because obviously the tax will increase enormously your base, and you'll be calculating how much money you're making for your investment, because that tax you are going to have to pay for it. It's not that no one gives it back to you. Okay. Pre-tax yield of 3.8, post-tax 2.4. Okay. Just looking at in Spain, in just commercial properties, it would be obviously a little bit lower, somewhat lower if you're looking at non-touristic and commercial properties. But you can hit, we're seeing this right now, you can hit 11% pre-tax, 9.9% post-tax. That is 3 to 4 times, depends on how you want to look at it, yield increase. And you say, well, yes, but okay, let's look at the next step. Okay, there's an Excel sheet that you can click here afterwards and see the calculations are very simple calculations. Okay, because the beauty of this is long term. Okay, I admit it. If you're looking at the next 2 or 3 years, this is not so impactful. But the key comes, and this is a very simple calculation using the same metrics, the same kind of increase in value of the property, similar yield rents. Obviously, there can be some variations, but the numbers speak by themselves. Why? Because when you generate 3 or 4 times that yield and you reinvest it, or on other properties, or on the stock market with an average return of 7%, the average return has been much higher in a global market. Obviously, I'm not talking about specific countries. If you talk about China, it's much lower. Spain has been lower, not that much lower, but obviously the US has an enormous weight on that. But if you look at the overall mix, you're getting around, historically, you're getting around 10, 11%. Let's calculate that 7%. The key of this is that you're generating all that yield. And on the yield, obviously, you can't take the value of the property. The value is allocated already. So the key thing is that the yield starts to generate all this incremental. Why? Because you're multiplying. It's a compounding effect. That's the beauty of the compounding, 3 times more. So the beauty of this is that you'll generate, if you look at total wealth, counting the property, and that for me is very important because that property shouldn't be allocated. You shouldn't be selling it, so you shouldn't be counting it. You should be focused on the yield. And when you look at the yield and that cash that will be in hand versus the property, you'll have 3 times more if you invest in commercial properties in Spain right now. This is an average case. Obviously, there'll be variations. Obviously, there is always some form of risk, but this is the key factor that we want to look into. Then, very important, what is the European Union? I think this is absolutely essential because when we talked about security, this is essential. We talked about yield, we talked about stability, certainty, but what is security? That's what the European Union is. The European Union is not an exciting, crazy market. It's not the West Coast of the US. It's not Southeast Asia where building is booming and busting, to be fair. I can see that in Bangkok. The European Union is 448 million people that live under a common framework, legal framework. They're a super state. Okay, is it exactly like the US? No, but it's very, very similar. Why? Because people can travel, work, and do business. Once you're a European Union citizen, you can move across. You can be a Spaniard, and I can move it to Germany. I can live. No one can say anything else. I have PR in Germany by being a Spaniard. Okay, I can vote. This is very important. I can vote in local elections. I am considered a German, except for the national elections. Okay, regional and local elections, I can vote. You are protected by law across all the regions. The same rules in many cases apply. Okay, this is quite important, I would say, because this is equivalent. When you think of California and Texas, you think, hey, it doesn't matter. They're both the US. Similarly, Spain and Germany are both the US. Cost of living in Texas, much lower than California. But you have the protections, many of the protections, not all of them, because obviously the states have different regulations, a little bit like in the US. But you have the protection of being a US citizen or a US resident, okay? This is very important when we look into this. Okay, France is the EU. Spain is the EU. Italy is the EU. These beautiful countries are all part of the European Union, EU, okay? From now on. This is the beauty. You can move across. You can't move now to Britain. Okay, sorry about that. But we have agreements with all the others. Okay, Britain is the only one that's out. Okay, all the others are part of the European Union. Maybe you're like, I don't want to go there. Doesn't matter. You have all these countries, okay, that you can go to, and you are protected by law. Then, what is the beauty of this when you're thinking long term? Well, there's golden visas. the European countries want foreign investment, want people to resettle. And for the small amount of 500,000 euros or 730,000 Sing dollars, which you can buy 3 properties, and it's very easy to check all this. You can get fast track to residence. This can happen. The golden visas take us some time, but it's 2 or 3 months. Okay. And from there on, you can move across Europe. You can go to your kids can study in European universities. You say, well, they're not the same as the US. No, they're not the same as the US. They don't have the prestige of the US. They're probably academically as good, okay, and much, much, much cheaper, much incredibly cheaper, okay. You can bring your family. You can do visa-free travel across all the Schengen area, okay. The Schengen states are all the ones that I showed before, and you can apply to eventually to citizenship. This is quite important, okay. Oh, and beyond that, very important, if you're a foreigner, you're not living more than 183 days in Spain or in one specific European country, you can actually have much lower taxes, okay. And generally, as you know, Europeans pay very high taxes. They have a lot of services in exchange for that, but they pay very high taxes. You have a special regime for foreigners, okay. So you have the certainty that you can diversify your investment, that there's an enormous market of tourism in Spain, in all of Europe, to be frank, and you can maximize on the yield there. But at the same time, you have the security and you have the possibility of a lifestyle that I actually didn't bring up. When you look into this, okay, if you're thinking, well, yeah, very beautiful, great. No, very important, I would say, if you think about it long term. When you look at GDP per capita, it's true that the US is a much richer country than Spain, not fool ourselves, but very important, the US has no services. The US, the GDP per capita, first, there's super rich people and super poor people. In Spain, that doesn't happen, or in Europe in general, it doesn't happen. And second, there's incredible amount of services. Why is this so important? Because healthcare, okay, is incredibly well served, okay? In blue are European countries, okay, or part of the European sphere, and how they rank in medical care in terms of infrastructure, okay? All these countries has enormous amount of medical facilities. For example, a very important thing that is very different from China is that you don't need to go to the hospital. You have a bunch of other medical micro services everywhere. I get my test done in Spain. I make them get my test done for everything 5 minutes walk from my parents' house. I just go there, book some time, and just get the test done. And I don't pay anything, absolutely zero. And I have an insurance that costs 30 euros a month, okay? With everything, prepaid, every service possible, okay? When you look at cost and availability, also here you have Spain, you have 3 European countries, okay? Very important. Second of all, first of all, when I mentioned the GDP, okay, the areas of high GDP are Europe, the US, Australia, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, okay? But very important, with very low inequality in this region. Also, if you think about it, it's still growing and still a rich part of the world. Is it as rich as this is Spain down here, okay? This is the Euro area. Obviously, Germany is richer and all this, but we're still talking about really high comparatively to countries of East Asia, Southeast Asia, or China. And this for me is very important and a little bit hard to explain, but the rule of law. This is so important. I couldn't put another slide here, but when you analyze what countries you can go to court and get things fixed, that you don't need to pay any briberies, that there's no issues with the legal system says this, and this is what happens. First 7 countries in the list are all European, and out of the 25 first, 16 are European. I think this is, we don't understand how powerful this is. This means that if you sign a contract in Spain, okay, if you sign a contract in Germany, if you sign a contract in Europe, they're going to be respected. They're going to be followed. You're not going to have to be thinking, oh my God, am I getting screwed? Is the developer coming here? You have legal protection. The rule of law commands. This is very important because that gives you enormous security in the long term. Okay. Then that's a little bit what we wanted to bring up today is basically what is the solution is basically to invest, potentially reside, knowing you are protected. Spain, Portugal, are obviously countries that give you more bang for your buck. You can buy more properties and diversify more. South of France is also we're looking into it. There's obviously even UK, there's even other areas, but we want to focus on tourist destinations, Italy being one of them too, because those guarantee that yield. They are going to be the next 20, 30, 40 years, the destination, the visit destination, the museum of the world. And they're going to be full of tourists from everywhere. And that's going to be generating enormous yield that will deliver securely, with certainty, and with height in terms of the yield. I hope this was helpful. I hope this has a little bit given you guidance on what we're trying to accomplish here.